So thus far, you've really heard about the intersection of identity with language and literacy practices in an instructional setting. For this third principle, I wish to share some examples of literacy practices that really honor the individual child and empower them to see themselves as a reader and writer. On the next slide, you'll see 3 key commitments to culturally relevant, sustaining pedagogy. And while I'm going to just provide a very brief little snippet of these examples, there will be references for further exploration like my colleagues have done at a slide later in the presentation. So the first aspect that we're going to look at is that honoring of the history and identity, and then we're going to look at how invitations to families will really let us understand the wealth of knowledge that children bring. And then we'll conclude with a theme that's woven throughout all assessment processes, and that would be celebrating strengths rather than focusing on the deficits. As we look to the first one, we can first kind of reflect on how fundamental it is to gather a baseline writing assessment. We all do that as teachers with children. And here you see an alternative to simply providing a prompt and asking children to write. What you see here comes from a recent article in the Reading Teacher, and I have to say it's one that I dove into during break, and I'm very excited to share with our pre-service teachers tomorrow, and then they're going to share with their second grade virtual readers this semester. So what I'm about to tell you is not anything that we've implemented yet, but we're very excited to begin that tomorrow. And that is sharing this lovely book, The Colors of Us by Karen Kantz. It's the story of a 7-year-old Lena who seeks to paint a self-portrait and use brown paint for her skin. But it's on a neighborhood walk that she really discovers brown comes in so many various shades and hues. So the book celebrates the differences and similarities among all of us. And then it invites children to create this self-portrait through paint or other mediums like paper collage. The link to the article is on the slide, a later slide, and you'll see where the authors coined the term paper selfie to represent the portraits they invited children to use. And they used a collage technique to do that. From this art project, children are invited to compose very simple identity texts. And then from there, they can choose from these little prompts that you see on the slide. I am, I feel, I believe, but there's always too that invitation that they can write in a format that they wish. They're not required to use those stems. From here, we can see not only their literacy skills, but more importantly, their hopes, their dreams, their passions, and experiences. And that's really where that intersection of identity and writing comes into play. On the next slide, you'll see another way that we explore identity and the history of our literacy learners. No Name is the Same is a class book that can be composed with learners of all ages. It can be done so electronically, as you see on this slide. On the left, you see the title page, and on the right, you see the writing frame that's given to learners in Black font, and then the example that I created of kind of the background of my name. Both the paper selfie and its identity text and the No Name is the Same really allow children to see themselves in authentic writing. And it's the kind of writing that others can then listen to and read themselves. So importantly, when we center their identities, we learn that valuable information that we can use in our teaching. I know I'm coming to the end here of our time, but on the next slide, I'll just mention that we do invite families to share their perspectives. And on the subsequent slides that follow, you'll see some information about the funds of knowledge that Mole and his colleagues have shared with us. There are questionnaires, and there's a little inventory that teachers can use in order to keep track of, okay, I know this about my students, but how have I applied it in the classroom? And then you'll see on the next slide some guiding questions we use to really stay centered on that strength space. So I know I'm rushing here. I do think those questions can kind of be mulled over and digest yourself. And the last little segment of my portion of Principle 3 would be the resources. So we encourage teachers to really think about reflecting on these principles. And here, as we conclude and we get into that reflective time later, we're eager to hear and continue the conversation, to hear your connections and questions and insights.